Instagram here because, why the hell not?
Yeah. Sounds good.
Aha, there it is. Instagram. Here we go. And what's nice is that we'll
I
have
should
a recording of this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I can
There's
go
no
ahead and
rush though. We're just shooting the breeze, which is nice.
Yes.
Yeah, no, this works out way better, and the quality of the sound is better here.
Right. Yeah, far better. Okay, live video.
We're gonna make sure that our YouTube is on. It's always a pain in the ass. There we go. At this point, I'm sure if anybody's watching this, they're wondering, why are they just sitting around tapping on their screen?
Oh, are we live right now?
It's a great question. Oh, yeah, we're live right now, for sure.
Nice.
We are live right now.
What is up,
Hi, everyone.
motherfuckers?
Exactly. This isn't by any means one of the episodes. It's not... We're just hanging out at the moment. We're going to answer some questions. We're going to record some answers, and that's it. So we appreciate you being here. If you would like to add anything to the conversation, you can ask questions. Just do so in the comment section. If you can do so in the comment section of our Twitch stream, then that helps a lot, or our YouTube channel, that helps too. But we'll check our Instagram as well to make sure that we get your comments and questions. And aside from that, we are just going to take off and see what happens. But yeah, we're not doing an intro or nothing. It's very informal. Hi.
Hey, all right, cool. I'm on Instagram now, I think. All right, do we want to do like a formal question one?
Oh, yes, we should definitely, well, not question one, but we should read the question at least, so that way we can, preface the clip with the question and then the answer.
Yeah. So are you thinking we do these like one question, or just figure it out after and maybe do like, if it's shorter, 2 questions? Or yeah, we can just go through them and figure it out.
Read a question and we'll tackle it, see what happens.
Sounds like a good plan to me. All right, I got one we can start with. All right,
cool. I've got a few on this side too, so we can just alternate.
Cool. All right, first question: are routines necessary for a balanced life?
That's a great question. I would say to some degree, routines are going to happen. You're going to get into a familiar cycle of things, in the same way that there is always the familiar cycle of the seasons and, day and night and all of that. You're just going to fall into certain patterns and cycles. But creating an actual routine deliberately in order to get a result, I wouldn't say that's necessary. I would say that it can get in the way of your organic growth, because now you're creating something based on an ideal that's going to get you to a certain place, that's creating a lot of pressure on you, that's removing you from the moments that you should be learning from moment to moment throughout your life. And so I wouldn't say that they're necessary, but I wouldn't say they hurt either. I think it really just comes down to the intention. Are you creating the routine, or is the routine the result of the ongoing process of you learning from your day-to-day experiences?
Well said. I think it's important to keep in mind too that there's like sort of natural layers to routines, and a component of the shifts and the changes could be being more in a routine and then not as much in a routine. And like there can be, I don't know, like a natural sort of fluctuation between those, and not basing your decision on what you should or shouldn't do can help that sort of play out more naturally. Like if you're feeling like you want to add a little bit more routine to your life, like go for it, but not because it's the right thing to do or the right way to do something, and understanding that there's always going to be a balance, and sometimes allowing yourself to not be in so much of a routine. There's things to learn there, and they're just different experiences. Like I know for me, being habitually, working out for years and years and years, there was times where it was harder to not work out for a week and not beat myself up than it was to figure out how to work out. where I can go. And so maybe some people think like, no, it's objectively better to work out, but no, it's a balance and it comes down to you. And, there's not a right answer. I think it's just, as Ray said, important to be mindful of the reasons that you're building a routine, like how much false certainty you're holding on to that you think it's getting you to a spot that makes you more than what you are. And so I don't think having a routine or not having a routine is better, but I think having, self honesty and just being willing to sort of fluctuate and go in and out. And maybe there's a cycle of a routine that's ending and you're like, no, I need to keep this routine. It's like letting that go and learning what you learned from not having so much of a routine can be helpful. So,
Nice. I would say well said. Absolutely. It's pretty much it. This is going to be fun. We're just wrapping through these questions. So again, anybody in the comment section or anybody watching this right now, feel free to add to the pile. We're just going to rip through these and see what our answers are. We've got a few from our supporters on Patreon, which is great. Some of them are interesting. Here's one for you. What is a cool dream that you've had lately?
now I'm immediately like going back to because I had one. It's so interesting how it can be like those are tough to remember sometimes. But there is one I remember. It was after our retreat. There was a couple people. I won't name names, but a couple people from the retreat and a couple people from college that I was with, and we were scaling this fucking like wall. It was a big like a quarry almost without any water in it. And we were kind of like scaling it. And it was pretty freaky because we were just like free climbing it, sort of, and like jumping down onto ledges. But it wasn't so high that it was really scary. But it was, I don't know, like 100 feet. But there were platforms. So like it was pretty high. But anyway, a couple people went further down into it. And then out of nowhere, the quarry started filling up with water. And there was like a cave sort of deal that we didn't explore too much. As it started rising, the people who were further down started floating. And then all these motherfucking sea monsters started coming out of the cave and they were just eating people. And there was a bunch of people that I didn't know that was there. And they were like killer whales. Like they were just grabbing people, throwing them in the air, eating their heads off. And I was like, holy fucking shit. There was a couple people that I knew down there like swimming around and they got really close to getting eaten. And it was like massive eels. There was one that was like 40 feet long, just like crazy looking sea monsters, basically just eating people. And everyone I knew was able to get out and scale the wall, but it was like heart was racing like crazy because I'm like holding on to this wall, but I was also seeing the whole thing, like seeing it from sort of the quote unquote external, looking at myself on the wall, seeing everyone else. But also, like, now that I'm saying it, I don't know if I was seeing myself on the wall or if that was just where I was looking at everything. I don't remember if I saw myself like Andrew in it. But yeah, everyone is able to escape barely. Um, but yeah, so recent dream.
That's awesome because there were people who didn't make it, but they were all anonymous people. It was kind of like the extras in an episode of Star Trek or something. It's like, here, we have all the main characters and crewman number six, and you're like, oh, that dude's gonna die. So that's really funny. I would say the coolest dream that I had was actually just last night. It was after I had a dream about shaving my beard. Which I found to be really funny. The dream became a little bit more conscious after that, and I found myself sitting in my bedroom, looking around at the walls, and then I would pick a specific spot on the wall and focus in on it. And as I did so, I would basically just move through that patch of the wall into another dream in another place, and then I would be there. And so I would focus on something else. I would just pick a square of, say, like the floor, and I would just focus in on it. And I could feel myself just let go and go into another dream in another location. So it was a really cool dream in terms of just being able to look at reality and then tap into this knowing that it wasn't what I assumed it was. And by virtue of that, everything I focused on with that mentality became a doorway to something else. So I thought that was a very cool dream. And the fact that I was fairly lucid through the whole thing, like I was doing it consciously, was extremely cool.
Damn. And so the focus then, and it's almost like the idea of the room you're in or whatever was your almost like ability, I don't know, ability to make sense of then the shifts. Because like otherwise you'd just be shifting dreams kind of. And then like you were able to comprehend it a little bit. And so much of and that just makes me think about like how much we use the past, our ideas about the past to confirm where we're at. And like we're always just here, but then we're using, oh, but I was went to school there and I grew up in this spot and like all everything stemming from here. It's like I usually think of the past as like leading to the present, but really it's like we use the past to make sense of the present, and that's kind of what it's there for. And so the shifts in the dreams, like the room you were in was just like as a mechanism to make sense of the shifts, like oh going through the wall or through the floor or the tile or whatever. And like that still doesn't make much sense because like you're fucking going through walls and tiles and whatnot, but it was like I don't know, along that track sort of.
So much like Mary Poppins in the movie Mary Poppins, where they jump into the chalk painting on the floor. That's very much how it felt, where all of a sudden reality was just obviously a sham and everything was just reflecting whatever mentality I was in. So as I was changing by letting go of the reality around me, it was like everything, and it wouldn't matter what it was. I could stare into a cup and I would just all of a sudden go into another room in a totally different environment. But I always maintained myself, not Ray, but whatever the hell I was experiencing at the time, which was funny. I knew what I was doing. So it was a very cool dream. Next question.
Awesome. I got Oh, all right. This let's do this. I saw this before. Please share your experiences with a bad high. Do you still get them? What's your theory on them? I can start. I mean, I could go into a number of experiences. I've shared them before on the podcast, a couple just with edibles specifically, but basically anytime I got high, it was just an aversion to relaxation, like an aversion to relaxing. And so with high specifically, like weed, cannabis, and we could go into trips and whatnot, but so much of the difficulty we have is like an unwillingness to relax, an unwillingness to stop making so many assumptions about or assumptions that I am feeling a specific way and it means something. Like with feelings that we go through, we make an assumption that, oh, it's from this thing in my past. This is where this comes from. But we're never really dealing with the past. We're dealing with right now. And we, in order to try and make sense of like how we're feeling right now, we'll dig into a story. We'll tell ourselves a story about ourselves, but it's never about solving the story or overcoming the story. It's just about like I don't know if it's accepting or just being okay with how you're feeling. And so being super high is a different feeling than we're used to. It's just different. You could say it's more intense. You can say it's like a difficult thing to handle, but it's just very, very different than what you're used to. And so it kind of like, I almost like to think of it, at least for me, and I can only speak to my experience as a jump in relaxation. So it can almost like accelerate how relaxed you are because say you're like, super tense and you can, relax yourself and it's like you move a tiny bit. And this is just theory that I'm spitballing with right now as I go. So we'll see if it makes any sense. But when you're sober, you can do that. Whereas when you're super high, it's like you're able to jump a couple, but that gap there is really uncomfortable because you're like, whoa, what the fuck is this? I've never experienced this in this way before. And there can be like a almost a aversion to just feeling that just because it is so different. But then if you're willing to relax or not even like, you go through it and you survive. You never died from like feeling a little bit more relaxation than you're used to, but it's just that different of an experience than you're used to that it can be jarring. And so I think that's a lot of what we are dealing with when we get super high, especially, like I feel like most people have some sort of edible experience where it was just so much. And I can imagine taking, like 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, like that would be a bigger jump than I'm used to, but it's still just a deeper state of relaxation and how much aversion I have to that, to just relaxing, period, is going to make that much more difficult. And my mind's going to come up with all different sorts of reasons to stay tense. So, have you considered this? What about this? What about that? What about this? And so that's all like almost as you're moving through it, it's like, this is why we stay this tense. This is why we stay this tense. This is why we stay this tense. But it's all false certainty. It's all like, oh, you got to stay tense so you can know it or have control over it, which you still don't. And so it's coming to terms with letting go of that assumption of control, which is so much of what we grow up being taught and told is like, no, control is you want to have some sense of control or some sense of knowing something. And then like we just run with that forever instead of looking at it and being like, oh, maybe, I can understand things now. I've grown up a little bit more. I have a recognition of reality, but I don't actually know anything. So I think that just the gap there is a big part of dealing with, quote unquote bad highs, just how much difficulty you have with relaxing through those layers.
Well said. I would absolutely say that is the case. The more you're thinking about yourself, the worse your high is going to be. Um, so much so that after a certain point, when you're not thinking about yourself, a quote unquote bad high is really just an intense high because it's not about you. You're not really thinking about yourself, but you're going through a lot of thought. And it's not that you're deliberately thinking anything, but you are just processing like a motherfucker. And when you're processing that much, it can feel overwhelming if you resort to thinking about yourself again. And at that point, people are like, "Oh my God, I just want to come down." And that can be the next kind of quote unquote bad high. But as for whether or not those still happen, yeah, I just don't consider them to be bad highs. I consider it to be a point where I'm pushing the boundary, as it were, in terms of what I'm used to considering all at once. And more importantly, being humbled by how little I actually know, as well as going through this process of really getting a depth to my appreciation of everything that goes into my existence. And so I would say that in that state of being, or in that intense state of being, I'm more inclined to just sit the hell down and just take it in. And that's why it doesn't necessarily become a bad high. It's because I'm not trying to grasp for that sense of control. I'm really just taking in what I'm going through. But as Andrew was saying, it really just comes down to just relaxing and breathing and not making it about you. And that includes when it gets super intense and you start taking in more and more considerations all at once, because it's not just on psychedelics that's going to happen. It's not just smoking weed where you're going to feel that. It could be in any moment of your life, as long as you're willing to relax, because every time you relax, you're just opening your eyes. And as long as you open your eyes, the more you open your eyes, the more considerations there will be, and the more justification to possibly panic.
All right, that last point, because I've been feeling more of that, like just when I'm sober, there's been points where I'm like, I feel like I don't know how to fucking live. Like I feel like I don't, and it's just, you know, I'm more relaxed in general, but I think I discounted how much that comes with additional considerations and like, because oh fuck, dude, like I went back to our older Patreon. I told you this already, but just for anyone listening, to some of our in early Patreon videos from like 2 years ago, and I hardly recognize myself. I'm like, who the fuck is that dude? Like, because I know how I thought about, or I don't know, but like, I remember how I thought about myself then, and part of me was like, like, felt more confident back then than I do now at times, and I'm like, "That motherfucker is, like, he has no basis." But then again, it's like, of course he has basis in being confident and whatnot, but, like, I was tense as shit, and yet there's certain situations where I feel more afraid now than I remember being back then, and yet facing that despite the fear, like, I'll probably handle it way better because I'm way more relaxed than I was back then now, and yet it's like part of me feels like the fear is felt more intensely for certain things, and yet back then, maybe it was just less consideration, less self-awareness, less I don't even know, or just a lack of concern because I used to have the mentality of like, I don't give a fuck about anything or like I don't give and I convinced myself of that and I gave a lot of fucks still, but like I wasn't aware all it was like fucks I couldn't even recognize that I gave when I was because like, just take dancing at the bar, for example. Like I don't have too much of an issue doing that in most situations, period. And like, a couple years ago, I would have had to be hammered to dance at the bar. And like, but I felt like I didn't even consider that being like I was still able to convince myself that I didn't give that many fucks. And like and now I'm, I guess, more willing to like say, like, yeah, I still definitely give fucks about certain things because I feel that. But that back then I felt like I gave fewer fucks about stuff and yet was way more tense and rigid. So it's almost like the feelings come with the awareness, but then it's I don't even know. It's like on you to just be like, yeah, there's a lot of considerations, and I still can only do what I can do. I can still just put one foot in front of the other. I still don't know any of those things, but they're more informative to my experience because I'm looking at them, but they don't have to become a weight, which I could turn them into right now if I thought of them in a certain way.
But it's so interesting because that's the difference between taking your time, listening, and stepping through the forest gently, as opposed to crashing through the brush trying to get to an end result. Like what we're talking about is just slowing down, just having more sensitivity and not being quite as single minded, not developing tunnel vision all the time. Because that's really the difference, right? Like most of the time, we're just focused on what we want and getting there. And that's it, right? But when we're not doing that, then we actually have to pay attention to what's happening around us. That is what's unsettling to us because in that, there's almost no direction except for all of the considerations. And they're ongoing all the time. And so we're like, God, this seems so complicated. It's like, yeah, life is like that. It's just that we want it to be simple. And it was simple when we were selfish. And you'll notice that simplicity and selfishness often go hand in hand in terms of like, well, this is just expedient. We'll do this because I don't want to have to think about this shit. We have another question. I trust that was solid answer. I don't know what we're going to make out of that for a clip, but that'll be fun. All right, we have a good question here. This one is, what's your definition of consciousness? Where does it begin and end? Beyond human form, where does consciousness exist? So this is a great question. I'm very excited about this question. I hesitate to use the word consciousness. And it's because as soon as we use the word consciousness, you assume we're talking about how you think as a human being. And so if we take consciousness not as the root, but a result of the root, then we have to look at the root. And the root is just awareness of self. Consciousness, or the complexity of consciousness, if you think about it, really is just more and more layers of thought and complexity about the idea of self. But that self that is underlying the idea, that self that is but that self that is underlying the idea is still there. And so that self is just the awareness that you are. And that awareness is shared by every living thing. What changes is the complexity that it can express itself through. The greater the complexity of consciousness. So a plant is aware of itself. And we've proven this because plants talk to one another. Certain plants can see people. Plants are aware of themselves, but they don't have the complexity to express that awareness to the same degree that a dog does. The awareness is the same, but the complexity is different. And so rather than the question of, or rather than the question being, what is consciousness? It comes down to what isn't aware. Everything that's alive is awareness. And so if everything that's alive is awareness, this points at a common denominator, awareness itself. Everywhere that life is complex enough to express it, awareness manifests, which indicates that awareness itself is a product of reality. And if awareness is a product of reality, then it does not have a beginning or end, any more than existence has a beginning or end, because existence can't not exist. There is no such thing as non existence. And so if existence and awareness go hand in hand, then all that is awareness. It has always been and always will be, and it can only manifest in the experience of here and now as you, regardless of the perception that that embodies in terms of you being separate from something else. Reality is always expressed through the observer and the observed. And so that is awareness. It has no beginning or end. You are the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end.
Fuck, man, that was well said. I don't know if I have a whole lot to add to that response, honestly. I think, yeah, there's 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 a lot to it, and I think the consciousness definitely gets tied up in thinking about, like, immediately thinking about yourself as well, and, like, understanding that via an idea of what it is, or an idea of yourself doing it, and, like, I I'm aware, but then it's like, and that's, I guess, the paradoxical bit that, like, it is, my awareness that is awareness itself, and it just comes back to that idea of yourself, like how you think about yourself, or whether you recognize that those thoughts about yourself are gonna be there in potential, but they're not actually you, and they're not actually gonna be you, but there's not a way to, like, think about that out of oblivion, you know? Like, yeah, I gotta just think of myself as awareness, as consciousness itself. It's like, without so much of that is what's left, but yeah,
It's just
that's my
not
2
thinking
cents.
about yourself as much at all,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not that you have to think of yourself as awareness. You are awareness. It's when you think about yourself that you become less. You become something else. And so that's the fun part about it, is just recognizing you're already doing it. You are already awareness. It's when you think about yourself that you become small. It's when you think about yourself that you become limited. It's when you think about yourself that you end up in time, and you have the narratives and self judgment and separation and all that other fun stuff. Otherwise, you are just in the experience that you're having. And it's interesting, epiphenomenalism points at this, right? Because we're already going to do the thing. And then after we're going to do the thing, we have the thought that we're going to do the thing, which points at what we're saying here in terms of awareness as a whole is already doing something. We think about what we're doing and take ownership of it after the fact.
And that one gets me fucking wondering, like, and so me, I am just fucking taking ownership of the thing, and it's just the ownership that I think that I'm something that's doing it, but that necessitates an idea to think that but I am doing it. And so how much, like, fuck. So, like, with epiphenomenalism and with the thing happening and then the thought happening about it post, is it almost like th like that gap is me, like the ownership and how much I perceive myself as something that can take ownership for it, and so I'm gonna be behind, like, quote, unquote, "behind," a step or 2 behind, a little bit less aware, a little bit less sensitive, a little bit less, fucking what's the word? Intuitive to what's happening, and the less I'm thinking about myself, it's like the closer I get, like if epiphenomenalism is talking about like something happening and then the thought about it being here, it's like if there's less thoughts, like how close do you get to what's actually happening? And then it almost feels like you have a sense for what's to come, but it's only because your whole life you've been experiencing reality not where it's actually happening, but where there was enough time for you to consider what it means about you and take ownership for it. And so it feels like it's a relative thing because there isn't even necessarily a past, future, whatever. It's like our base experience is just kind of in the past. And so actually being present feels like being in the future a tiny bit just because you're actually here instead of, as epiphenomenalism talks about, like the things happening and we take ownership and have a thought about what we did after the fact, just and that's like the cost of perceiving myself as separate, or not the cost, but like a component of that cost. Hmm. Fuck.
Exactly. It's kind of funny, right? Because we can't think about it without it being about the thinker, right? Up until then, we're just awareness doing its thing. As soon as we think about it, though, we have to take ownership of it because all thoughts come from the perspective of me thinking. So there's always a feeling of ownership. Good times. This is fun. We have more questions, but it is your turn.
It is my turn. Some of these questions are so goddamn weird. All right, we can talk about this for a sec. Perspective on having kids of your own. Um, Where already has kind of been through that consideration in boat, but definitely has lots of thoughts about it. I'm sure. Do you want to kick it off, or do you want me to
Sure. Why
go
not?
for it?
So I would say it really just comes down to why are you having kids? That's the question. Should I have kids? Wrong question. Do you have your shit together? Better question. In other words, when you're going through something in your life, are you immediately looking to somebody else to solve that problem for you? When you are feeling rattled by, let's say, somebody questioning your ego, are you going to look to somebody to make you feel better, or are you going to self regulate? Are you going to deal with that on your own? Because having a kid isn't like having a roommate. Everything is raw, everything is new to this being that is coming into the world. And they are going to go through all of these developmental stages wherein you are not the focus for them. You cannot demand consideration from them. You cannot look at them and go, why are you acting like this? Because they don't know any of the things that you currently take for granted. And so if you're going into parenthood and you are still needy in yourself, I'd recommend that you just don't. If you're doing it because you want something to bring you closer together with your spouse, definitely don't. And if you're doing it because you want some sense of purpose, don't. It really is a responsibility. You really need to look at it that way because that's exactly what you're doing. You're bringing someone into the world that's going to make ripples for the rest of their life, not just your life. And they're going to impact everyone else. And every choice you make that's selfish is going to take something away from their life when they're young, especially. So unless you are prepared to just sacrifice what it is you want for a good decade, don't have kids. Because frankly, it's better to just ask yourself why you want them. Maybe get a puppy, because kids are a lot. They're a lot in the same way that you are a lot. And this is a fully functional human being that is going to one day go into the world and deal with shit. And if you're still unable to deal with your own shit, It's hard to pass that. Hard to say what you can pass on to your kid, unless, of course, it's the willingness to say, "I'm still having problems dealing with my own shit," which is self honest, and that actually is a good sign of a good parent.
Yeah, well said. So, with all that in mind, in my perspective, yeah, I'm not quite sure at this point in my life. Certainly, hope there aren't any running around, but because that would be shitty, and I actually am not aware, would not be aware of that because I'm not right now. But yeah, definitely not at the moment for me. I mean, at some point, maybe one, but even then it's like it's like people it's so gnarly how much we discount like everything you just said about like just the gravity of doing it because it's just the next thing that you do. Like that's so much of our fucking world. It's like but but Ray, what are people gonna think if I don't have any kids? It's like, that's not a reason. That's definitely not a reason to have kids. But people are gonna judge me for not having kids. Like, don't that's the if that is even a consideration whatsoever, it's like, yeah, fucking snip that stuff up, lock that shit up, because like Jesus fucking Christ, but because I hear it, like that is a reason that people have because it's what do you mean? It's what people do. Like, what if there's a point when I'm lonely, when I'm 70 and who's gonna take care of me? And like Jesus Christ, it's not like a fucking robot you're popping out so that in 50 years, 40 years, they're gonna be able to take care of you because that's definitely how it's gonna be. Like Jesus Christ, like hire a fucking nurse or something. They're gonna be like a million times cheaper than having a kid that grows up and then what you're going to guarantee that they're going to even want to do that like and then there's the whole considerate the whole thought of like well what am my legacy to live on it's like live your life you have a whole life like you can live it fully your whole life without having a child like god it's like at age 20 even, we stop, living like enjoying life. We'll do it, on the weekends if we're drunk, but 30, 40, 50, it's like it becomes not about you, but to prolong you in a sense, like not and it is selfless in a lot of ways for people, but like I don't know, like the reasons that people have kids, it's rarely just actually thinking about why, because you ask why, and the reasons are fucking insane most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, we've made it extremely convenient to have children. I mean, you're going to have a kid, and then maybe you'll get some maternity leave, and then you'll be around for the first year, 2 years. One of the you or your spouse might work, and then after that, daycare, and you're going to start looking for something to do. And you're going to go back to work, and your kid's going to go into daycare, and from daycare goes into preschool, and then preschool goes into school, and then before you know it, your kid's 18 on their way to university. And what you've managed to do is see them maybe for an hour or two every night, maybe including dinner before they have to go and do their homework. And in all of that time, maybe you get a few weekends with them. Maybe you get a lot of weekends if you're really trying to take time with your kids. But I mean, how often are you just fucking bagged after a week of work where by the time the weekend comes along, you don't want to spend that time playing with your kids? Right. So it really just comes down to like stop looking at the ideal. Like, well, that's what people do when they get to this point in a relationship. They have children. There's a lot of fucking kids around. Think about adopting. Like if you really want that responsibility, think about adopting. There's a lot of kids around. But, that said, just because you want a kid doesn't mean you should have one. In the same way, just because you want anything doesn't mean you should have it. Often we want it because of the assumption, and we want it specifically if it's a want, it's about you. And if it's about you, then don't have a kid because the entirety of being a parent is making it about them. So that would be my advice there. We have more questions. This one's coming from the community Discord. If you don't already know, we have a community Discord, by the way. You can join. Just go to dualisticunity.com and click on the Discord. Actually, I'll just throw it up on the screen here. Hold on a second here. We have a Discord thingy. Bam. It's there at the bottom. So you can join us on our community Discord. It's totally free. You can participate in a lot of fun conversations with, frankly, brilliant people who are asking questions, not just of the world, but of themselves, trying to more or less just figure out why we settle on all these assumptions. So if you can, join us on Discord. All right, here comes the next question. It's not actually a question. Growing in a once codependent relationship with a partner who doesn't yet share your mindset. I don't know what the question is. Maybe just some words of encouragement. I can honestly say, if I had any words of encouragement, it would be to let go of them achieving any kind of mindset, because that is still slightly codependent. You are still looking for them to hold your hand or to walk with you as you explore the path that is individually and uniquely your own. And it is entirely possible that that's not what they want to do with their life. And if it's not what they want to do with their life, if they don't want to make progress in that, if they are looking to just feel satisfied and settle down, hold on to what they think they know, and live their life that way, the question is, are you satisfied with that? And if you're not satisfied with that, the question comes down to why. And that doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't stay with this person or that you should stay with this person. But it really just comes down to, why do you need them to walk with you? And if you do need them to walk with you, is it going to eat at you? Because that's going to start deteriorating your relationship. It will become expectation, and that will become pressure, and that will become resent. And so, what is it that you want them to get? And why is it that they should get it and not just you?
Yeah, well said. I think a lot of it comes down to self-honesty and just like, because it goes for whether you're in a, relationship like with a partner, or it's friends or it's family. Because I spent a while like wanting to convince people of things, or of, a certain mentality, or a thing to do. I remember even fucking when I was meditating like 5 years ago, like when I saw someone going through something, I would like want them to start meditating. And it was like a subconscious way of just like confirming that I was doing the right thing. It's like I want validation that someone else like is deriving benefit from the thing I think, or like someone else is, it's like a way of confirming that you're doing the right thing, or like you're doing something correctly. It's like an external validation it can become. And so the more people I convince, the more right I am about my idea of the right way to live. Like even the assumption that like being on some sort of path or not is like the right way. It's like what what it what journey, what path is the right way? Is it that there is no path? And then, then why is there the assumption that someone else is experiencing that incorrectly? And I get it with, when you see someone who's going through something and you want to share or add, or talk about it. Maybe they even have an aversion to that. But I think there's, I don't know, like degrees and ways. And I'm even saying like tongue in cheek, get through to people with something. But like the more willing you are to not convince someone, like the more willing in my life I've been just like to talk about whatever, like the more that certain types of conversations just have a way of arising, like conversations about relaxing a little bit more, maybe being willing to question your assumptions. Like it's like they find ways to come up from places I would have never expected. But when I'm trying to like push something, it's rarely taken in or considered, or wanted to go in that direction. And like the less I wanted to, the more it sometimes happens. So I think, but yeah, in general, like being self honest, like why do I want this person living differently than they are. Like, who am I to know that?
And I can relate to this. I understand what it is. I've had a lot of friends in my life that, because I wanted to continue questioning things that they were relying on, we just weren't able to stay in each other's lives. And it's not because I had to go or they had to go. It just kind of happened over time. We just drifted apart over time. And so sometimes that would be the organic process that would happen if you weren't holding on to it as well. That said, as long as the other person is fine with the journey that you're on, then it doesn't really matter what it is that they'd like to question. Just continue on. It's okay to be loved and love people, regardless of their mentality. Absolutely. So long as there is that acceptance, that willingness to let you grow and to grow themselves at whatever rate, as long as there is that acceptance and recognition of self responsibility on both hands, I think it'll be fine. But if there is that level of, why aren't you keeping up versus, why are you leaving me behind? Because that is also another component to that kind of relationship. That's something that's going to continue to pop up. And it's just because there is that level of codependency. And you'll know there isn't because you won't have those thoughts. Your question, sir.
Yes, it is. Alrighty. Uh, God, some of these are like I'm getting distracted. Some of these are absurd. Um, all right, I don't know where the fuck we're gonna necessarily go with this, but what do you think about the Buddhist framework of God also being an illusion?
Yeah, that's pretty much on par. That's exactly right. God is an illusion.
Yeah, cool.
Well, and okay, so let's flesh that out.
That's what I was. I got a couple thoughts, but
God is an illusion in the same way as the idea of yourself is an illusion. It is a concept. It can never be the entirety of the truth. It's an idea. It's even a thought, but it would not exist otherwise. So what I mean is that whatever it is that you think of God, it just disappears. It ceases to be when you stop thinking about it. But what is actually there, the reality that people have been trying to describe, possibly, remains. It's just never what you think it is. It's never the description. It's never the idea. It's what is. And different people try to create different ideas about it, and it's always based on their own needs. And so the idea of God is a fiction. It is a fiction that changes according to the fiction of you that you hold on to. That's not to say that there isn't something to the reality, that there isn't some reality behind the concept. It's just never what you think it is. And if you're thinking about it as this overpowering force that has a list of commandments and whatnot, that all just comes down to your need for a father figure.
I've been realizing how much that, like, the idea of God, the concept of God is just like the extreme of the ego maintaining like itself and avoiding responsibility, like passing off responsibility. Cause it's like, all right, God's something I'm thinking about, confirms that I'm something that can be thinking about it. And it's not on me because it's all in God's hands. And God's got a plan. And like, who's to say immediately in that conversation, you can just say, who's to say this isn't part of God's plan? What's happening? It's like, I don't know. I'm just God's servant. I'm just doing my thing. It's like, I don't have to consider anything that's going on outside of myself. And it gets painted as this good thing to like believe in God, be religious, but all it is ego maintenance, another variation of being able to maintain my idea of myself. And so, because as soon as you start to wonder about either side, it's like, yeah, if you're not thinking, there's no sky daddy. Like, there's no idea of God that you can maintain without thinking about it. Like, just right there, like, yeah, of course that's not real, but then it's my idea of myself too, and it's easier said than done, but it's the same thing that's left, when you aren't. And even just right now, like, if you weren't thinking, like, what would be happening? what's happening? And then you're like, well, and I'm this people and I'm listening to these. And it's like, without the words, labels, ideas that are maintaining those words and labels, like, yeah, the illusions are all gone. And so all of our thoughts are just kind of like variations of illusion, God being one of those thoughts.
Nicely said. Absolutely. We have another question. This one from one of our Patreon supporters and a member of our team. Julia asked this question. I really enjoy this question because it really brings it down to, I guess, the challenging part of all this. Okay. People often ask, does anything really matter? I found that there are a few different perspectives on this. Number one, nothing matters. Frowny face. Number two, nothing matters. Smiley face. Number three, everything has purpose and meaning. Number four, we create our own meaning and purpose. What is your perspective? So I'm going to give my answer, and it's going to be very short. Yes and no. All of those and none of the above.
Both and neither, as always, because yeah, and we can leave it at that. But it's like I can just like because I was very much I made a bunch of videos that was just basically going on about how nothing matters, and it's like it's just looking at one side of it is like ultimately is something, and it's like no, of course it's no and yes because everything has impact on everything, period. Like every interaction that you have impacts everything forever, all the time. So it's like from that perspective, of course, and then in the immediacy, like I guess it's like, does it matter in the sense of does it mean something about you that you're only again maintaining via thought and assumptions? Like, no, because they're all thoughts and assumptions, but does it matter in reality that isn't what you're thinking about? It's like, yeah, it's still stuff that's happening. It doesn't discount that things aren't happening, or one perspective would discount that things just aren't happening. And so it's of course maintaining both, but from the side of just nothing matters, blah blah blah, like running around like a 4-year-old, just like nothing matters. It's like that's more or less a complete avoidance of responsibility for what you do. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, it doesn't matter. Oh, nothing matters. Oh, so yeah, it's both perspectives and neither always.
Exactly. Really. I mean, it really just comes down to what you want to focus on. You can focus on any of those or just pay attention to what you're doing, in which case none of those become a question. There's no cerebral processing in terms of, why am I here? What is this all about? What is my purpose? All of that implies that there's an answer that's going to satisfy that for you one day. When in fact, the only thing that's really going to satisfy you is the actual genuine experience of being here in the present, which is never going to be something that you'll be able to adequately explain to someone else who is committed to a concept. And therein is the rub. It's very hard to express it to somebody who is caught up in their shit. Let those who have ears to hear, hear. It's like I'm saying good shit, but some of you are going to turn it into some fucking nasty crap. You're going to turn it into something self-serving. I know you are. And we did. I mean, that's how you can take the message, love your neighbor as yourself and justify a crusade. Like what? So yeah. We have more questions. So that was, did you ask that one or did I? No, you asked that one, right?
Yeah, it was the God illusion. Is that
Okay,
where that one
perfect.
started?
I
Okay.
believe so.
All right.
All right, here's another
Or
one.
wait, no, that was that was 2 ago, dude. That was it was Julia's question,
Oh,
right?
right, it was Julius. And then in the case, it is your question.
Right. I mean, it's doesn't fucking matter, and I gotta like scroll through these to
It's a fun ping pong game. Go
it
back and
is.
forth.
It's good. It's good. Yeah.
And people get to watch us just fucking around because this is not an episode. Again, this is not an episode. We are just answering questions, and then we're going to turn some of these into clips later on. So this is your chance. Get them in. I don't know how much longer we're going to be doing this, but I do want to mention just quickly because I saw on the Discord just this mammoth question. It's huge. I'm not going to read all that right now because I'm live. So if you would like to have that question answered, please shorten it just down to something that we can read quickly, pass on via live video or in a video segment, and then chew on afterwards. I appreciate it. Otherwise, I'd be happy to read through it, and I might later. But just throwing that out there, Andrew.
Sounds good. All right, this is a good one. How do you trust yourself? Been a challenge for me, especially with self-doubt sometimes. Oh man, there is not an easy, satisfying answer to this. I think there's ways that you can maybe make it a little bit easier if you're not taking yourself so seriously to gain I don't even remember. Hold on. What was the how do you trust yourself to gain that sort of trust? But it's something that's like and I don't even hesitate to say like is something that's built over time, but it's something that is never it's never going to be like everything's easy. Like anytime there's actually something new that you're jumping into, like it's gonna be uncomfortable. Like it's there's gonna be shifts that feel funny. It's gonna be, yeah, you're probably gonna be nervous trying something new, but it just comes down to doing that over and over. But like that initial leap is still gonna be just as uncertain every single time. It's just that you doing it over and over and over builds the ability to do it again. Like once you do it once, it gets a little bit easier to do it again, which gets a little bit easier to do it again. And then, but it never guarantees anything. And so to build trust in yourself when, especially when dealing with self doubt, is just, I don't know, wondering like, which discomfort do I want right now? Like, is it the discomfort of continuing to worry about something, be afraid of something? Or is it the discomfort of jumping in, like, the discomfort of jumping into a cold plunge or something, you know, when it's cold out? Or like, because it's like you're cold whether you're in or you're out, but it's going to be colder if you jump in, and there's like a discomfort in both, like realizing that not doing the thing that's allowing you to build trust in yourself, faith in yourself, there's a discomfort there, there's a pull there, and maybe it's subdued and prolonged and extended over a period of time, but it's still that discomfort. And oftentimes the things that we do and face are far scarier in our head than they are when we make that jump. But there's nothing I can do or say to make anyone jump. It's like that always comes down to us, but realizing that wherever you land doesn't mean anything about you. It's still just an assumption. I don't know, can help make it easier to make that initial jump.
Nicely said. Nicely said. Um, I think it's important to remember when you're asking, how do you trust yourself, that there's a couple of ways that you can look at that. I'd like to point out the example of, let's say, a teacher who isn't considering your specific life and what you know, but is making demands that you perform in a certain way in class. And when you don't necessarily live up to that way, the teacher says, "How can I trust you?" And what they're saying there isn't, "How can I trust you?" but "How can I guarantee that you're going to live up to my standards?" That's not trust, that's expectation. And so, what you're asking, how do I trust myself? I would ask, what are you expecting of yourself? Are you expecting yourself not to fail? Are you expecting yourself not to stumble? Are you expecting yourself to always make the right decision, to always have the ideal result? What is it that you're expecting of yourself? Because that's really the question. It's not how do you trust yourself? It's why are you demanding so much of yourself without considering how far you've already come or the limitations of how much you've done? Because the only way to learn more is to do more. So, how do you trust yourself? Jump in, keep jumping in. And what you'll find is that you're more and more willing to jump in because you stop having so many expectations of yourself and you start to realize that you can only do what you can do. It's a good question, though. Really enjoyed that one. All right, let's see here. This is kind of a list of questions, but they're all related. Okay. Well, there's two. How do you get out of your own way? How do you accept and shift out of feeling stuck in the mud and take responsibility for your life and do something with it?
I think first thing is recognizing that my assumptions about where I'm at or how stuck I am aren't necessarily how stuck I actually am. Like I can assume that I'm in a rut. I can assume that I'm going through something, but like when I'm not quite so sure, maybe not even like entirely uncertain, like I'm pretty sure, but like I don't actually know. There's like a little bit of a shift. There isn't quite so much weight anymore. Like a lot of when I'm going through something, feeling like I'm stuck in something, it's just I keep fucking telling myself that I'm stuck. I keep telling myself a story and like feel like I'm sure about what's going on. It's like that's the thing. It's like how to stay stuck. Keep making the assumption that you're stuck. And so how do you stop that? Just being willing to not be so sure about it and getting out of your own way, I think is similarly recognizing that you're not sure. And to your point, which I really like the fucking expectations is not so much about gaining trust. It's just about recognizing where your expectations are far too high. And so when they or, even anywhere, And so when they aren't there so much, it's like a big component of you at least being in your way is just are those expectations. And like you in that moment when you're in your way are comprised of just your expectations. Without so many of those, there wouldn't be like a wall. It's like the expectations are the wall. And it's like, like if I'm writing something and I'm expecting myself to write 10 pages in a row versus 1 page in a row, it's like that wall of expectations is higher. It's like, that's much more daunting versus if it's a 5 foot wall, I can push myself over and hop over. But that's just based on me having expectations of myself to do or be anything. And that's how much oftentimes I think like that wall of you is just where your expectations are lying for a given situation. Like, why are you fuck, man, I resonate with that one a lot. Like, why do I expect myself to handle something in any fucking way that's better than how it plays out? Like, who am I to assume that that's even what's best to like set a fucking bar for my fuck. I am constantly setting bars for how to handle things and do things and like, oh god, that is just yeah, those fucking and that's the wall. That's you in your way or your expectations of yourself. Because without them, then it's like "Uh, jump, jump in. No, not so
Exactly.
much to
Well
do.
said. This is a good question. I would say, how do you get out of your own way? Remove the journey. If there's no path, you can't be standing in the way. Right. And that's a big part of this. Like if you feel that you're in a rut, it's because you have a destination that you're trying to get to. You have something in mind, a person that you want to be. And if you are on a trajectory towards a destination, that means that how far you are from that destination or how far you perceive yourself. Because remember, the destination's a fiction. How far you perceive yourself is really what you're experiencing. You think that you're in a rut because you don't think you're making progress. According to what? According to your ideal of what progress means. But the fact is that there isn't anything but progress, literally moving from one moment to another, always adapting. And so you are growing all the time, and your ideal isn't the reality. But to answer your question, how do you get out of your way? Focus on where you are. Stop trying to think about where you're going. Stop trying to think about the ideal. Stop trying to get away from the mentality that you're in and really just look at it. Sit in it, understand it, because that's how it changes. It's not through trying to get away from it, it's through looking at it until it changes into something else. So I would say remove the path and you won't be standing in your own way.
Well said. Yeah, fucking A. All right. That's my question. Yeah. Alrighty. Uh, mm, mm, All right. What do you think the highest potential harmony looks like for humankind?
Oh, okay. So I want to preface this by saying I don't mean to sound as abrasive as this might come across. I think it resembles anarchy to a very large degree. I think the highest potential harmony comes from when people are individually responsible, when we're no longer demanding others live up to our standards, when we're no longer defining ourselves according to any degree of right and wrong, when we are in fact just living our lives and taking responsibility thereof. I know that isn't necessarily what anarchy is, but it kind of is. What I'm saying is that there are natural structures, there are natural organic structures that come into being when people live together. It's just that we try to control those structures and they become overarching, and then you have a government that spans an entire fucking continent. So I think it's just what happens organically when we get out of the way. I think that the way that humans work together is when humans are actually working together. And the only way that that happens is when they abandon their perceived needs and actually share space in reality where we have very similar priorities. It's when our priorities become egotistical that we end up becoming selfish and we're no longer able to work together. So the highest harmony of humanity would just be to take ourselves a little less seriously, stop trying to be uh, the epitome of intelligence, stop trying to look at ourselves as the absolute peak of evolution, stop trying to define ourselves as such, to stop trying to feel better than our neighbors, stop competing with other people, to stop thinking about ourselves when somebody else gets something and wondering why we don't have it, or if we're ever going to get it, or if we're not good enough because we're never going to get it, like all of that stuff. I think that that's all that we can address, and at that point the rest takes care of itself. I don't know what that's going to look like in any way, shape, or form. But I know it's not going to look anything like what most people picture it as, because most of what we picture is a response to our current distaste for suffering. And we're going to have to grow up beyond that distaste if we're ever going to get to this quote unquote harmonious life.
Well said. Because when I think about someone talking about, the perfect humankind harmony, and it's like there's a hearty face and a finger emoji thing on there, it's like very much my idea of a controlled, like, paradise in a sense, like beautiful nature all over the place, and just like people skipping through the field, but it's entirely controlled. Whereas from that perspective of natural things that kind of keep you maintaining a sensitivity, like you imagine just life, reality, and nature, how, with humans, like, because it's like because we were smart enough and because we developed more with our brain, we're able to jump like the food chain, essentially. Because, like, if you go back to, maybe there isn't so much control or just tribal moving around, it's like there's lots of things. There's, tigers, lions, and bears out there, and like they're above us in the food chain unless we're able to fight and defend ourselves. But in terms of just one-on-one physical, like, you're not, fighting a grizzly bear. But we don't realize that those are kind of like natural components of reality, like, obviously, and like the world and the earth, and they do are variations of, like, not that there's purposeful checks and balances, but, like, there were far more natural checks and balances, whereas now it's, like, striving for just maintaining like, me to the most of my ability, the best of my ability, to the longest period of time, and, like, oh god, dude. Mm. And just, like, that sort of shift and looking at society right now, like, just how far that is in the direction of, like, ultimate control and ultimate distraction and ultimate, you know, focus on myself and, like, what's best for me, and just, like, a very, very little consideration, like, to the extreme that we won't even, unless it's someone that we know, like, even hardly interact whatsoever, and, like, we're living in a world in our head, and anyway, I had no direction with that last part. I'm done talking.
Is it my question?
Yes.
All right, all right, all right, all right, all right. My life has completely changed. I do not recognize my internal self any longer. Today, this felt frightening. I wanted to reach out for support in that moment. A familiar perspective came through. I am exactly where I'm meant to be. This, of course, brought me back into the present moment, and I calmed down. I wanted to ask if this seems normal. Laugh out loud, normal. Was that just my old self peeking into the now? Um, I hesitate to refer to it as your old self because that somehow implies that it's not also your current self. It's just that it's habits. They're habits. That's really all it is. And it's not that you've become a different person. It's that your awareness of those habits has changed. And so now you're coming out of identity and you're coming out of self judgment and you're catching a breath of fresh air, as it were. And then you're recognizing when the air is not so fresh. And so it's important when you're going through this just to recognize that, yes, it is completely normal. Um, but it's going through the process of discomfort. It's going through the process of recognizing that if you can't judge your progress, if you never know how you're doing, if you never actually have enough context to be able to measure how you're doing in relation to all of life around you, then all you're really left with is this ongoing process of change. If you can't think about yourself and ever come to a conclusion that actually definitively defines your value and potential, then you're always left in this state of uncertainty. And in that state of uncertainty, you're going to be aware of a lot of things. And as you continue to grow and stop focusing on yourself, you will become even more aware of even more things. And in that state of heightened awareness and additional considerations, you might feel the urge to panic. But it's mostly because of the tendency to rely on an idea of yourself to gauge whether or not you can deal with something. And so it's helpful to remember how often you're wrong and have been wrong. How many times have you told yourself you can't do that and you did? How many times have you doubted that you could do something and you did? How many times have you doubted that you could make it through an experience and you did? The evidence being the fact that you're still here. So this clearly indicates that the idea of you is not the truth. It's not the reality, but you depended on it for a long time. So, yes, it's normal. It's likely going to happen again. It's usually a sign that your awareness is once again expanding. You're going to go through ups and downs throughout this process. There's going to be time where all of a sudden you become aware of a lot more considerations, then all of a sudden there's going to be times of integration where you start to take in all of the things that you've actually taken in, where you actually start to integrate it into your life and it changes you. And then you go through another upswing of giant fucking insights. And each and every time one of those upswings of insight happens, each and every time you're willing to accept uncertainty to the point of actually being able to see more considerations that you were blocking out with your false uncertainty, you're going to feel a little panicked because all of a sudden it's like the plate that you were holding above your head just got bigger. And you're immediately going to want to ask yourself, am I strong enough? And you never have to because you always have been.
Well said. Holy shit. So with that, and I don't even remember the question, but I think that was an adequate answer, and I have another thought that I just am gonna go with. Um, like the shifts in like collective mentality change, like almost requires like or at least the potential for an individual to perceive themselves as going through something, some sort of story. Because when you said like yourself, your past self, still yourself, and like realizing that it's like every if I could consider maybe 100 ideas of me as I'm growing up, but it's actually infinite. But it's just like that's what it looks like is almost all of these variations. That was all me, like basically expressing variations in a mentality of folks like and just on a spectrum of focusing on myself versus not focusing on myself. But every time it was myself doing it and changing, because it's not just like in silo. There are things environmental, like the rest of me changing, and it's just us taking ownership and doing our best to reinforce, like one way or the other, the changes that we're going, or the shifts or the perspectives or the decisions. And but the whole time it's like it's me, quote unquote, like choosing, and it's always in potential, and it's just how seriously I want to take myself. And fuck, like even the thought of, because I think of not taking myself seriously as like humorous, lighter when I'm acting, I'm not taking myself as seriously. But it's just that, like that's the variation, because the lightest way to be is loose, relaxed, silly, whatever, free, whatever. Like that's when you're not as weighed down by a perception of yourself. And that's why, if you see someone on the street like laughing and singing and dancing, like someone's going to call the police, because everyone is so fucking tense and rigid, like holding on to so much weight of what comes with taking yourself seriously, which is this is the first time it isn't like a playful versus unplayful connotation. It's just my idea of myself. Like, how seriously am I taking that? How much do I think that is me versus not? And as you take yourself less seriously, there's the potential to, it's like how seriously you take yourself is how sure you think you are. And they kind of go hand in hand, but it's on variation. So you take yourself a little bit less seriously. There's the potential for certain perspectives or fears or concerns to fall away. And like there's an easier way of them playing out. They're still going to maybe be there, but the less seriously you take yourself, it's like the more seamlessly you work through that shift and that change as you're going, and things are informing you as you go, and it doesn't have to be an arduous journey. But then again, like a component of that is experiencing certain thing is an arduous journey. Is like a component of that. It's like, how arduous are you going to make it? There is that on you. But it's like the potential is always there one way or the other, and the thought about your taking yourself seriously is always there, but it's not necessary. And so yeah, it's all like that shift playing out through me perceiving myself, like taking myself seriously or not. And like that's a lot of the variation that we go through.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's all, again, a spectrum of control. All right. That's really all it is. How seriously I take myself is how desperately I want to be in control. Because why am I taking myself seriously? Because I think it's going to influence my life. I think it's going to influence my reality and the results that I get from it. Right? Whereas if I don't take myself so seriously, then I have to more or less just deal with things as they come. Right. Which is why, again, the meek shall inherit the earth. I think the next question's yours.
Alrighty.
Nice one. Nice one.
Yeah, thank you. Uh, t- 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 Mm.
I just want to point out to everybody, if the burping is offensive, I just want to mention that the alternative would be far worse.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. You don't want to hear those or smell them by any means. It has been fun though, like kind of like trying to lose followers in ways like because when you're being yourself, like there's gonna be people who don't want to hear it and don't want to listen to it. And there's just even just for the sake of not wanting to see the potential, like if there's an aversion to doing it, like, you think if you're, you know, doing something crazy in public, it's not harming anyone, but then someone may tell you, like, hey, you're being a lot right now. Stop that. It's like, what am I doing? What's going on? Like, what's the issue here? It's like, and there's nothing there, there's nothing there, but like there is, it's like you're making people uncomfortable. It's like, why would that make someone uncomfortable? Because I'm relaxed and they don't want to relax themselves. And someone being relaxed when you're not relaxed is almost threatening in a sense. It's like there's an underlying threat to me having to look at the fact that I'm the one maintaining the tension. Like I'm the one taking myself seriously. I'm the only one that can take myself seriously. Like, is that the threat? Is it the fear and the concern about that? So anyway, it's just funny how there's this like aversion to relaxing almost. Not almost in a lot of ways. But
Yeah.
yeah, I still haven't another question. Like, I don't even remember what was I doing again? Oh yeah, a question. Um we already answered that. We've covered this before, but I'll let you kick this one off. Thoughts on vegan philosophy?
I don't see anything wrong with eating the way that you want to eat. By all means, do so. I don't see anything wrong with changing what you do in an attempt to change, I guess, the buying habits of the world around you or to change the manufacturing habits of the world around you. I don't see anything wrong with doing something out of the intention of trying to lessen the harm towards something else at all. I would say that the only harm really with veganism is the tendency to identify as such and to vilify anyone who doesn't agree with you. I think that it really is the only thing that I would warn against is this idea that if you're doing it, you are somehow being more responsible than everyone else, as opposed to more responsible in a particular way. Because if you are identifying with that way, then you are once again contributing to the divisive nature that drives a lot of this shit show. So while it is important to change and grow and think about the considerations and do all of that, that is all that's important. It's not important how it defines you, and it's not important how it defines others according to your perception of yourself.
Yeah, well said. That covered it quite well. I think that like how often we think about things in that silo and we'll just like and that'll be a huge part. Like if someone's vegan, you probably know it because they probably told you because that's one of the biggest components of them or like where they very much how they're able to identify themselves the most surely. But again, it's just one perspective. And like how often focusing on that perspective, thinking like that's the entirety of making you better than someone else, you completely miss out on all of the other ways. but there's like this, I don't know, kind of smug thought that it outweighs the other things. It's like, well, I'm doing this well, and that's what someone will point to when they're doing a bunch of selfish things and then they do one thing that's not. It's like, but I'm doing that. It's like, yeah, but that's not all you're doing all the time. There's more to consider. And so the more focused we get on just our idea, even just our idea of ourselves is just a very, very, very limited grouping of assumptions that's very much unique to us. And yet we think that's the entirety of us. But there's all different ways. There's an infinite number of ways, both positively and negatively, that people probably perceive you. And you could be perceived and you could perceive yourself. There's just like a couple that we keep going back to, but that leaves out all of the other potential considerations. So yeah, it's very important not to get so lost in one being self-defining. And yeah, like when it comes to the actual eating and the food, like I get it for sure. It's just weighing all of the considerations and being willing to be honest about that is is important.
Satisfied with that answer? Absolutely. I've got another one here. I don't know how long we're going to stick around. If you have questions and they get our attention, we'll stick around for them. Otherwise, this was fun, and we're going to do this more often because it's always encouraging when we get in here and chat with people. And it's really nice to hear your feedback and everybody's sharing. And at the same time, they're connecting in the comment section, which is great. All right, here we go. So, admittedly, I'm going to tackle this in my typical way. Okay. Um, if you were to look at shame from a neutral standpoint, what are some of the benefits and advantages versus the deconstructive and limiting aspects of this human condition? I am not going to answer this question. And the reason is because, frankly, you should know. And if you haven't reflected on how shame is affecting your life, me telling you how shame is affecting your life isn't going to help you. So I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to move on to the second part. How can we lessen the pull of shame in a resisting manner? How can we embrace it in such a way that accompanies the flow rather than resists it? So that also doesn't mean anything to me whatsoever because you're always in the flow. So it doesn't come down to how was that worded? Hold on. How can we embrace it in a way in that? How can we lessen the pull of it in a resisting manner? How can we embrace it in a way? I would just say just understand it. It's not about embracing it or showing it compassion or doing any of that. It's still thinking about yourself. You're still trying to soothe yourself. I would say that it just comes down to understanding shame and self absorption go hand in hand. That's really what it is. It's not about feeling better about it. It's about understanding the fact that it feels shitty because you're thinking it defines you. That's shame. Right. That's more or less it. There's nothing else to do. And there's nothing to do about shame that's resisting the flow or going with the flow, regardless of what you're doing. You're in the flow. That's all conceptual. Fact is, it's just looking at shame for what it is and how it acts is all that you can do. It's not about escaping it. It's not about understanding it, embracing it, making it feel better, giving it a blanket. It's none of that. It's none of that. It's just understanding it as a mechanism. It is a door that you walk through when you think a certain way. That there's nothing wrong with it until you're through that door. Then it feels like there's everything wrong with it. Right? But if you're thinking about yourself, you're going to continue to feel shame. If you're absorbed in the concept of yourself holding truth, you will always be in danger of shame. Trying to address the shame does nothing.
Well said. And how often we can just build up things, maintain things, stories, just like, and we'll like white knuckle that shit just to avoid feeling, the depths of certain things, or we'll take drugs to numb ourselves from some of those feelings. But oh man, because even someone who's maybe very comfortable, and they feel like they don't feel those things as much, it's like they're still, it means they're holding on very tightly to a perspective. Like it has to, because the alternative is like being willing to feel whatever, however you're translating shame or some extreme feeling is like the willingness to just feel it, then there isn't anything you gotta hold on to avoid it or mitigate it or overcome it or whatever, whatever, however you're responding to it. And so you can just look at it and like also being honest with yourself. Cause even that is like, and I was thinking about this in regards to judgment and like fear of judgment recently. It's not to say that everyone judging you is being selfish or trying to make themselves feel better. And I guess judgment maybe sometimes has a certain tone, but then if someone is, like not all judgment should just go glazed over. It's like if you're not taking yourself so seriously, you can read it and think, oh, maybe this is something I could look at. And there have been plenty of times in my life where I like felt like I was getting judged, and then in a moment of clarity, I was like, "Huh, that's actually a reasonable perspective." And the only reason that I felt so shitty was because I thought it meant something about me. And so, if you're willing to not be so caught up in focusing on yourself or taking yourself seriously, like anytime anyone says anything, you can just weigh it and take it or leave it. But it doesn't necessarily stick in the same way in the sense of it meaning so much. And then you learn a lot more and you grow a lot quicker and you feel more relaxed more often because so much of the tension is the desire to avoid, you know, feeling certain things. Like I'm going to tense so I don't avoid the extremes of it. And I'm just able to mitigate that. But then it's like a big part of the reason they're so extreme is because of how tense I am and how much it has to like fight through that to be felt in a sense. And now I'm like, whatever that what is it called when you like bring something to life? Kind of fight anthropomorphizing.
Anthropomorphize, yes, something like that. I've
Something like
never been
that.
able to pronounce that word. It's always driven me nuts.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know what like anthrop anthropomorphized.
Correct.
Anthropomorphism.
Anthropomorphize.
Nice. All right. Nice.
Yeah, it's a good word. I don't have any other questions. Like we've had a bunch of questions. Some of them are just not questions that are going to turn into a video clip that's helpful to people. So we're not going to ask those questions, but we are going to do this more often. So if anybody has questions that you were thinking, it'd be really nice if there was a clip about this, just because, sometimes people don't remember this, or I don't remember this, or something like that, please submit it for the question section, because we're going to try and do this more often. Do you have anything else?
I'm all set. Those were pretty. Yeah, I have a bunch of weird ass shit in here, but that's the extent of the ones that I feel comfortable talking about on here.
Awesome. Well, then this has been a blast, and we just thank you everyone for joining us. This is totally impromptu. We were going to record an episode today, and we went, you know what? Fuck it. Let's address some questions and let's make some clips and whatnot, because we're going into the new year and it's going to be a lot of fun to do so. That's it for today. Tomorrow we have a roundtable, correct?
Yes, it is a roundtable.
Fuck yeah. So anybody who would like to join us for the roundtable episode, you can be on the episode. Just join us at patreon.com/dualistic unity. Tier 2 and tier 3 supporters can join us. That's it. That's all we're going to do today. Thank you everyone for joining us. This has been a lot of fun.